Hey, welcome back to Mocktails with Marina. I'm your host, Marina, and today we've got Kavatender extraordinaire Eddie Higginson, former Kavatender and longtime consumer, joining us to discuss Kavatender stories and why we do what we do. I am so excited to dive right in and learn so much more, so let's just get right to it. Thank you so much for joining us today, Eddie.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yay! Oh, you guys, I am so stoked to dive right in. So, we're just going to start learning about Eddie to give you guys some context, and then we're going to tell you some stories about what it was like to be kava tenders together and understanding a little bit about, because we both went into management around the same time. We're going to talk about what it was like to make that transition. And then lastly, the transition after that, which is into entrepreneurship within this industry, which is like throughout this whole journey of Eddie and I knowing each other for the past few years, it's been really cool to be able to, go down this journey together and have someone else who has been in the trenches with you, but also understands that industry from the bottom up. So, Eddie, please tell us about your first kava experience.
Yeah, definitely. My first kava experience was back in 2020. It was during the pandemic. It was definitely kind of a heavy time when I think everyone was kind of just looking for something to do, kind of a nice way to relax. I was in college, I was a senior, and I was in Flagstaff, Arizona, going to Northern Arizona University. And there had been a kava bar that had recently popped up, and me and my roommate were super interested in trying it. We were looking to do something that was kind of relaxing, but a little bit more social, that didn't involve drinking alcohol and kind of facing the repercussions of drinking. So we were looking for something that was healthy, something that where we could meet new people, just something new and fresh. So there we were introduced to kava for the first time, and that was a great experience because it kind of opened us up to a whole new world of a community, really, and kava itself. It was a really cool experience. There we were able to connect with different kava tenders, try different variations of kava, try it in different forms, whether that be in chai lattes, with coffee. It was a really cool experience. After that, I ended up becoming a regular, and I liked it so much that I ended up looking for a job there. And I kept going in time after time, asking if they were hiring. And eventually, they were looking for a new kava tender. I had gone to the interview. I was very nervous. New to the industry, I had some barista experience, which was super helpful. They kind of coincide with each other, being able to like make drinks, the customer service aspect to it, of course. And that was just a great experience for sure. Being able to have that opportunity to even talk to the owners and kind of see where they're coming from. During the interview, we kind of discussed like where the owners were coming from, and their experience with kava and how it assisted them throughout their life. They were actually two veterans, who struggled with PTSD, and kava was extremely helpful to them, just dealing with the different anxieties and everything that they were kind of just dealing with in their everyday life, after serving. And I could relate to that for sure because I kind of struggle with anxiety. And I definitely found kava to be a great social lubricant in the sense where I was looking for something to be able to give me the opportunity to open up to people, but without the repercussions that alcohol does have. Becoming a kava tender was one of the best experiences of my life. I learned so much about not only plant medicine, but also relating to others, customer service, and just kind of being part of a community that really benefited everyone and was open to all types of people. And that was extremely beneficial to me for sure.
That's amazing. I love this story so much because it all starts with one drink and one experience that leads you to coming back more and more. And I love that you also mentioned the fact that you talked to the the owners, the management multiple times before a position was open. And I think there's something really cool about that because kava enters people's lives at such specific and interesting moments. And it almost, not that kava is like a testing kind of a plant. If anything, it's a very healing kind of a plant. Um, but as in, you know, what can draw you to kava tends to be the thing that helps you heal whatever anxiety you're experiencing, right? So, for
Right.
example, like Eddie, I love that you mentioned that the owners were really open with you on that interview, telling about their experience with PTSD, because that's something that you hear all the time in this industry, and it's something that's really important to mention here because if you're not willing to talk about how kava has helped you, which means sometimes things are going to get a little bit personal, a lot of bit personal, like
Exactly.
you can't help but to like face those anxieties and face those not just the source of it in an aggressive way, but as in like you can heal those anxieties. You face it in the sense that kava gives you enough space to be able to be like, okay, this thing is fucking scary that I want to do, but I'm gonna drink kava. I'm just gonna go for it anyway. And then you do it. And then on the other side of it, there's always so much growth. And so not just for yourself, but for everyone you interact with. And Eddie, that's something that I know, having worked together for years behind the bar and getting to see that, the people that when you open up to and you're like, "Hey, I'm just having this kind of a day," or like, "Hey, this is how kava helped me." How many people that helps by just being authentic. So Eddie, I'd love to hear, more about what were some times that happened where you may have been, um, for example, behind the bar and you're like, you know what, I really need some kava right now myself in order to do my job.
Definitely. Yeah. So just even like kind of being a human, you being in the service industry, you definitely are expected to kind of have that consistent happy attitude and uplifting attitude that kind of spreads to the customers in order to be able to sell the product and kind of just create a fun experience for everyone. And for me personally, sometimes I do get overwhelmed in certain situations, whether it be like a crowded room or a lot of people talking. And like I was saying earlier, kava bars, it's great for community. And oftentimes in community, while people are drinking kava, that kind of makes people relaxed and everything. Controversial topics can be brought up, different problems can be brought up. And kava kind of just allowed everyone to bring it back down to reality and
Yeah.
soothe everyone's anxiety and be able to, I don't know, open up to everyone and kind of just share like a love for the community. And I think that's something so special that kava bars hold for sure.
It is so special. And to be honest with you, like it's amazing how many Kavatenders describe themselves as introverted and their only social time in life is like that is them when they're behind the bar. Otherwise, they're just at home.
Right.
I know we fall into that category. I know so many other, I know Ariana in a couple weeks ago episode falls in that category and so many other guests in the future. So the thing that I think is really important to note here is the difference between like kava tender culture and bartender culture. So, like, bartenders sometimes in alcoholic environments are allowed to like drink on the job and others aren't. And some people can handle that really well. And some of them, they'll fill their shots or their glasses with something non-alcoholic so that they can, keep making their money through the night, but have a cheers with someone. But then there's always going to be that one person that drinks too much on the job. And, it's not just because there's some lush, it's because, hey, well, maybe they're having a hard time because, they're dealing with some crazy drunk people and bartenders, baristas, anybody in that drink, no matter what drink you're serving, you tend to be someone's therapist in some way, like
Right.
unofficially. So I think what's important to note here is not every kava tender drinks kava behind the bar. Some of them they only drink it off shift, some do during the shift, and by no means is Mocktails with Marina any sort of medical conglomeration or, here to give official advice in that regard. But I will say as someone like with my experience, when I started behind the bar, like I'd already been in customer service for a decade. I'd already done all these things, but I still had some anxiety because I came into being a kava tender in 2021, right after the pandemic, when people were coming back into the public space and people were being weird and people were being like, everyone forgot how to be a person for a second and everyone was just more like giving out more cortisol vibes.
Right.
They weren't, so there was a lot that we all had to deal with from that time. And it just goes to show that working on yourself and healing and growing and all these things are lifelong activities. And drinking kava behind the bar was something that I would do occasionally, but I learned very quickly, you must drink water because
Right.
otherwise you're going to feel very dehydrated. The capsaicin in that kava, if it gets concentrated and kind of stuck in your bladder, it may start making you feel like you're getting somewhat of a UTI, which when you are behind the bar trying to serve a whole rush on a Friday night, that's not going to do you good. So just PSA out there, drink your water if you're drinking kava behind the bar.
Definitely. And also going back to like what you were saying with not all kava tenders may drink kava, but I also think that's like a huge part of kava bars in general is just like the diversity of choices and drinks. Being able to kind of one day you might not feel like drinking kava, you might feel like today's not the day for that, but there's also so many other options there that many kava bars offer. And I think that's so important for both the customers and the kava tenders to be able to reach for a different drink that might make you feel like a little bit more uplifting or in whatever way you're trying to feel. It's just super interesting to see and have experienced that, especially while working. It was very cool.
Yeah, that's such a good point because with kava's reverse tolerance as well, you may start as like, you're coming into the kava bar and you fall in love with kava and then you fall in love with community. And then you're like, oh, damn, why isn't the kava like, why isn't it treating me the same way it did when I first started drinking it? Like, you might notice you have to drink less of it in order to feel the same effects, because your body gets used to and gets more efficient at processing the kava lactones. And when that occurs, that's when you don't have to stop coming to the kava bar. You don't have to stop hanging with the community. You just understand that it's a seasonal type of experience. So I love what you're mentioning here, Eddie. Like having, if you're a kava bar owner out there, consider adding this to your menu. Having alternative options that are not kava, that are not kratom, but like something to just help you rehydrate, help you basically take care of your body in other ways that like kava is wonderful, but it's good at like a certain thing. It's not the holistic package of wellness here. Like it's a miracle plant, but it's not going to clear out certain organs, right? Like, it's
Right.
it's important to know what botanicals can help each other. And that's what makes a really good kava tender. So a kava tender that just serves you what you want and doesn't educate you is not taking care of you. And this is where, Eddie, I loved when we got to work together behind the bar. We always did kind of a bump set spike together of we weren't the kind of servers that were like, well, those are my customers and these are yours. Like we would
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
both help the same customers. We would just, provide additional information and help each other make the drinks and cash them out. And, Eddie, I'd love to hear from you what your favorite like part about interacting with a brand new customer is. Like, what's it like to give the spiel to someone who's never heard of kava or any of the botanicals before?
Definitely, yeah. So being able to kind of share my own experiences with people, I think that's like the best way to describe all of these products to people, especially while working with them, kind of experiencing it kind of on like almost on stage. You really get to see the effects of it. And I also loved being able to see how one thing might affect me one way and I might not like it, but then for other people, this might work really well. And I think that's super cool too, to be able to find your own little niche, from effect to taste to the way it looks to the branding, everything. It's super cool to be able to kind of have your own unique experience within the bar. And everyone is still having a great time. Everyone's doing their own thing, and I think that's super cool.
Heck yeah. So I'm gonna kind of start transitioning this conversation a little bit because Eddie and I both, again, we were kava tenders behind the bar together. And then when I moved into being a general manager, Eddie had moved into being an events manager, but was also continuing to work behind the bar. So we have these different perspectives of serving people, but then also managing the space itself. And that being said, I want to have a conversation about tips really quick because kava tenders, they typically make bartender wage and then they get paid tips on top of that. Typically, tips in a kava bar work the same as a regular bar. You're going to do about 20% of your tab if you had a great experience. Obviously, you can go up or down from there depending on, what occurred during your time there. But as managers, we always liked to judge ourselves basically on, and this wasn't something that we ever judged and compared to each other necessarily or anything like that, because it's always a competition with yourself, right? So our goal was to always make 20% in tips because that's how we knew we did a good job for the people who walked through the bar. And when Eddie and I worked together, we always made more than 20% in sales, which was so fun and so great. And honestly, a lot of that came down to number one, education that we've been talking about, but number two, the flow behind the bar. So again, Eddie and I were always like collaborators. We weren't like, and we split our tips completely evenly when we were behind the bar. So it wasn't about like how many, well, I served 20 tickets and you served 10. Like, no, we all helped each other do everything. So I think that teamwork really led to having that increase in tips, which again, why am I talking about tips? Because that's the best, like one of the best qualitative and quantitative ways to describe how great a customer like service experience was. Because customers are not going to be tipping more than 20% if they're having a bad time in your establishment. Additionally, this ensures that your kava tenders want to stay with you long term because they're making the money. So being able to provide them with resources and tools and education to be able to then turn around and use to support the customers is huge. Um, so Eddie, I'd love to hear, what do you think is an important thing to keep in mind when you're trying to flow behind a busy bar and you're working with another kava tender?
Definitely, yeah. Specifically within kava bars, I feel like it's important to kind of make sure that people have the experience that they feel like it is worth tipping the 20%. I think that it kind of takes time for a new customer to kind of assimilate into the culture and understand that it is so similar to a regular bar that serves alcohol in the sense that you, as a bartender, are still serving them in the same way, if not more, because you're educating someone on it. So
Mm-hmm.
the biggest thing about having a flow behind the bar is kind of understanding that new people are going to be coming into the bar that have no idea what these plants will do to them. So you kind of have to describe to them what can happen, best case scenarios and worse. So I feel like that's the most important thing is to be able to educate people, let people know their options, and be able to work with your coworkers and be on the same page of helping each other out. Because when a bar is busy, at a regular bar, it's super easy to bust out drinks. But then when you're at a kava bar, you have to stop at each person and kind of explain to them what each plant may do to them, kind of like explain or have them explain to you what effects they're looking for, all of those great things that come along with kava tending. So it kind of does equal out to be a great experience for everyone just because you're providing so much for someone and giving someone so much individual attention.
It's so true. And when you're giving all of that individual attention, that's why it's so important to have your buddy system, right? Because again, let's go back to the fact that a lot of kava tenders are introverts. A lot of Kava tenders, they're talking to people all day. So you got to be able to read your buddy. Like, hey, have you already given 10 spiels in a row and I've just been over here making drinks and cashing people out? Like, you want to switch roles so that your mouth gets like a rest for a second and your brain
Right.
doesn't have to talk to people and vice
Or even in the
versa.
sense of like I may have experienced something that you haven't, or you may have experienced something that I haven't. And
Yeah,
like it's really easy to be able to be like, well, I haven't experienced that, but Marina has, so she might have a better suggestion for you than I do. You know what I mean? So
it's
I
so
think that
true.
being able to kind of listen into while focusing on your customer, you kind of do keep an eye out for your coworker as well.
It's so true because there are some people out there that they're gonna be like, "Are you sure?" Or like they just don't. They just for some
Right.
reason don't vibe with you, or maybe they're just kind of like scared because maybe they went to a kava bar that was irresponsible with education and served them something that made them feel terrible. So now they need like extra reassurance. Well, we can just bump set spike each other and help reassure and continue to educate so that no matter how many different perspectives someone needs to hear, just to show them we really are there for them. And to hear two different kava tenders kind of saying similar things, but from different perspectives, like that's how you build trust.
Exactly. And that's why I think it's kind of important too in the industry to kind of for every actor in the industry to be held responsible and accountable from each other, just because two kava bars might not work together, but one bad experience might keep them from the other. So I think that that kind of works throughout the whole industry as well.
That's very true. So true. I love kava tender stories because, when it comes to like your day to day going into the bar, you're like, there's so much happening that, you get home and after a shift, let's say you get off because it's like maybe you're working like the night shift. So, you close at midnight. It takes an hour or two to close. So by the time you're home, it's like 2:30, 3 in the morning, and you're eating an old burrito and you still can't go to sleep quite yet because you
Right.
were so overstimulated from talking to all the people. And then you finally go to sleep and then you wake up and then it's the next day. And either you have another kava tending day or it's your day off. Regardless, you have to do nothing but self-care because being a kava tender is high energy. Not only high energy mentally, but it's physical too. I mean, man, I had abs when I was behind the bar all the time, not only because of my active lifestyle, but because of constantly being in movement. So I think it's really cool to also, sit down and listen to and talk about kava tender stories more because this is something that while kava bars have been in the United States since about 2002, it still is it's a unique concept and it's something that the nuance here is incredibly important because when, a lot of times I know that we have listeners who are coming in who they've never run a kava bar before. Maybe they've never even worked at one. And they just assume, oh, well, I have experience in coffee or I have experience in alcohol. So I should be able to figure this out. And I'm sure you can totally figure this out. But these nuances are so important because as Eddie is really pointing out here, like it takes time to educate people and to assure the customers so they understand what you're serving while it's a high volume night. And obviously, your regulars and the people who understand you don't have to talk to as much, but you'd be surprised we're still in this like early phase where more than 50% of your day is giving the spiel to new people, which is it's an exciting moment to be alive and in this industry, of course, but it comes with a lot of responsibility. So, that all being said, Eddie and I, when we were kava tenders, and we were just vibing, and then there was just a moment in the company history where, we both just kind of had to become managers in order to keep our jobs. It was just, there was a lot of movement in the company at the time. It was, you know, It was a wild time. But during that time, it forced us to learn a lot more about the products and the people we serve because it's one thing to be a kava tender, but it's another thing to manage kava tenders and then also manage the event space that people are hanging out within at that kava bar. So Eddie, having been an event manager in this kind of space, means that he did some work that was, it wasn't just about what drinks are being served, but what are you doing while you're sipping on that drink. So, Eddie, I'd love to hear from you. What are your favorite kind of kava bar events and why?
Definitely. Some of my favorites always ended up being revolved around music. I also really enjoyed some of like the health talks we had from different, doctors, health practitioners, everything along those lines. It was just really cool to be able to see that either people are just enjoying the music or getting educated while being able to relax and socialize and meet new people. It was really cool to see while throwing those events to see all of these people have a great time. And from an outsider's perspective, it might have even looked like, wow, like this is just a normal bar experience, but there's no alcohol being served. And you would see people dancing, you would see people mingling, you would see people meeting their new significant others. It was a really great experience to see and to be able to provide people with things to do that don't include alcohol. It was just a really, really special thing for me to be able to see all of that. And then also from a personal perspective of it was kind of intimidating for sure. I was in the beginning of me accepting the position, I was a little bit nervous because getting people to come to an event where there is no alcohol is kind of challenging at first. There's definitely those obstacles that you have to overcome. But it consistently proved that wrong in the sense that these events were huge for people. People would look forward to them every week, and it really brought a bunch of people together that wouldn't have already. So I'm super thankful for that experience and to be able to be a part of something so special.
Yeah, and I love that there's this bar overlap where you can have people, you can see the dancing, you can have DJs, you can have a nightlife experience, but like you're saying, you can have doctors. Like you're never going to go to a bar and listen to a doctor talk, but you're going to go to a kava bar and listen to a
Right.
doctor talk about something or, entrepreneur circles, just learning in general. It's cool to be in this environment where, like you were actually saying in the more beginning of this episode, where it's like, because kava calms you down and it like kind of opens up your opens you up so you become a little bit more vulnerable, but not in the same way where you like lose your inhibitions with alcohol. It's not that you're losing anything, like you're very consensually giving information, you're very aware of what's happening, but your defenses are down a little bit because it's a connecting plant. It's a connecting feeling that happens. And so when you're consuming this drink, and you're more open to information, but you're also more open to yourself and you're more open to your feelings on how you really feel instead of being just this agreeable pushover of a person. Like you feel relaxed and comfortable enough to actually be able to voice yourself a little bit. And that being said, this is where, again, the difference between an alcohol bar and a kava bar, you're going to have a wide variety of education topics or a wide variety of different types of people who are into different things. And some of your clients may have completely opposing viewpoints. A lot of other businesses, they tend to like kind of service one type of person. I'd say kava bars are this weird oasis and the only place on planet Earth where I've ever had a political conversation in a public place where there's no yelling. And that's happened
Literally.
many times. Like, we'd literally be having conversations with people from all over the political spectrum across the entire bar, and no one's fuming, getting up and walking out and having a difficult time. It's a genuinely respectful, like, hey, did you hear about this like local political issue? Oh yeah, let's talk about it. Oh, there's opposing viewpoints. Doesn't matter. Then at the end there's a bula. Like I've never
Right.
been in another environment where that's been so possible. And it goes to show that, this is a very different environment from alcohol. But that also means that people are going to be more sensitive on the other side. So, for example, let's say you are a kava tender or your team of kava tenders is in a bad mood, or they're just like, oh, I hate people today. Like people pick up on that, and then your sales will dip. And then if the people who are running the events that are being planned aren't up to speed on how the events are supposed to go, it can really bring the vibe down. And it's hard to, I've seen alcohol bars have literal shit shows. Like as a former performer, showing up to some venues were a little bit more professional than others. And the funny thing about shit shows are, a bar would be like, oh, well, a round of shots for everyone while we get our shit together. Or, oh, things are 20 minutes delayed. That's normal because we're all drunk here. But in kava bars, you can't get away with that stuff. It's very unprofessional and it doesn't look good, and people see it immediately because if they're not sober, they're at least a lot more aware. So, Eddie, I'd love to hear from you about, what are some struggles when it comes to bringing an event to life in a kava bar?
Definitely. Yeah. As I was saying before, with a lot of the time, people really are attached to the idea of drinking alcohol during an event. And I think that it can definitely be intimidating going into an event without alcohol at first. But I think that having these other options that might be able to help you loosen up a little bit or feel a little bit more comfortable to be able to talk to the person next to you, I think that kava bars like allow that to happen. I think the hardest part is just getting past that initial um, discouraging feeling for new people in the community to walk in and say, "Hey, I'm going to attend this event." Um, and a lot of the time with kava bars, it is a close-knit community. So I think that people can be intimidated walking into that. Um, but I've seen time and time again at many different kava bars. I've gone to a lot of different kava bars all over the country, and you will 100% feel connected with someone before you leave the bar. You almost
Yeah.
have to try not to try not to connect with someone. And I feel like it's super unique in that way where everyone truly does feel welcome, no matter what your political views are, what you look like, or anything like that. So it is super unique in that sense. I think that, like I was saying, like the hardest struggle is just getting people to initially come to that. But I really think it's easy to overcome that through, I mean, with us, like we kind of just found like local DJs, local bands, local speakers, or finding a relevant topic that you feel like the community needs to hear about or is interested in. Things like that, I feel like are really easy to overcome. But you do face some negative talk from others, and you honestly just need to ignore it and keep going forward with it because eventually people will see and enjoy the events and continue to come and look forward to them. So I think it's super important to have an event aspect to a coffee bar for sure.
Yay. I love this point so much. It's like if you just have good service and you just educate people, and once they're educated and they're enjoying their drinks and you're a good kava tender and you say, "Hey, have you met my friend Ted?" and you just
Right.
introduce them to some random person at the bar, you've created community. Now if you introduce them to a regular that attends events, that regular is even going to invite them. So there's this natural thing that occurs where word of mouth marketing, we always know, is the most helpful, always, no matter what industry you're in. But kava bars, like you have to double down on it because you can't even, our marketing restrictions online are huge because we're so fringe. So, really leaning into that and ensuring that you're just being true to those service ideals, then you're all good. It all plays out. And I love that you mentioned here, Eddie, that who there's always going to be someone out there that's going to say something, or there's always some other kava bar out there doing some other kind of event. And what matters most is that you are taking care of your community and you're only striving to do better than yourself in the past. And that's what's going to help your kava bar do the damn thing. And of
Right.
course, that's going to transition us into talking about products, though, because we want to make sure that if we are uh, having these events and we're having people feeling a good vibe, we need to make sure that people understand how to safely consume these products. So there's so much more nuance to kava and kratom. This is something that since there's not a lot of regulation, people can just jump into being a kava tender, working your events, doing these things without knowing anything. So, you know, Eddie, what would you, and feel free to go in any direction with this that you want, but like, if you could train all the kava tenders in the world and you could say, hey, Kavatenders, these are the things I need you to make sure that you are communicating to everyone. Because if you don't, you might think it's a tiny little detail, but someone's gonna get sick or something's gonna happen. What would you like? How would you want to train all the kava tenders? Like, what do you want them to know about helping people safely consume kava and kratom?
Definitely. I think the biggest part of that is to be able to be honest with it. I think that kind of I've seen in different kava bars that I've visited. I think that sometimes they give off the idea that this is the end all be all perfect medicine for everyone. And I definitely don't think that's the case. I think that it's super beneficial for some people. And I think that a lot of people enjoy it. And it is a great thing to be a part of your life. But I think that really being honest and sharing your own personal experiences along with the facts of it, I think that's the most important part of it, along with proper brewing, of course, and proper dosage, whether that be measuring things correctly or brewing the right amount into the kava or kratom. I think that's extremely important because that can make or break someone's experience and make or break the industry for sure. So I think that's, again, another part of being accountable for each other because once someone does have a bad experience with, let's say you put the wrong amount of kratom or kava into a drink and you put way too much, that could totally ruin someone's experience. And now not only you, but the industry sounds like they're lying. And I think that is a shame because there's so much to be benefited from this. And there's a lot of people out there that don't want to see the kava industry thrive. And I think that I want to do everything in my power to make sure that that's not the case for sure. So I think the best thing to do would be to really be honest with your customers and kind of see where they're coming from and what they're looking for and act accordingly.
Yeah, so important. I want to add to that like, so you can keep your brew technique a secret. There's nothing wrong with that. That's proprietary information. There's a lot of different ways to brew things. But when it comes to serving size, if you cannot tell someone how much is in a single or how much is in a double, just serving size. I'm not saying you have to tell us exactly how much you brewed. Like, is it whether it's grams if it's the tea, or if it's the milliliters of extract. Either way, um, it's really important that people know serving sizes in order to, again, be honest and make sure people aren't having a hard time. Luckily, kava's nice. Kava will, it kind of naturally tells you when to stop. Like, you're not going to want to keep drinking it into oblivion. Like, you'll be like, I'm good. But kratom, on the other hand, if you've never had it before, 30 grams is an overdose if you're doing the powder kind of a tea vibe. It's really important that you are aware so you're not over serving people, but also so that they know, like, let's say they go to another kava bar or they, God forbid, goes to a terrible smoke shop, they can start to see for themselves. They can discern what is good or what is not good. Um, and they can understand how to have that internal intuition for what is good and what is bad kava and kava and kratom because, you know, even, I've been in this industry for a while and I'm still, kind of navigating in a way where I'm like, "Ugh, is this one going to be good or bad? Like, am I going to have a great after? Like, am I going to have to cancel my meetings or like, is this going to go well?" Like, we're still in that in that phase, it's somewhat for some parts of the products on the market. And I don't mean that to be scary. I mean that to say, it's important to be able to know, first off, how many grams you should be taking so that is this bad kratom or kava, or did I just overdo it? Or did I just
Right.
brew it wrong? And then also to be able to know, like to be able to spot it before you even start to feel icky, can you start to like maybe start in smells in the powder? Like, for example, if your powder ever smells metallic or like diesel, you don't want to have it because that means that it was manufactured in the third party nation or the third world nation instead of like in the US. So that actually happened to me one time, by the way, and I just learned why. So I'm gonna tangent for a second here where like Tyler and I had some kava in Hawaii at this one place, and the first cup was good, but then the second cup like literally tasted like diesel. And later, after talking to some industry insiders, they were telling us, oh, that's because in Fiji, um, they're like there are different ways. So like the supply chain is somewhat, it's not straightforward. Sometimes it comes straight to the United States. Other times it goes somewhere else, like off of the farm to go be processed, not in the United States. And then it gets put into these machines that the machines themselves might be all right, but then they're a diesel powered engine. And because um, the I'm blanking on the word for aeration, like air filtration in the building is like not up to par. So then the diesel fumes get sucked into the plant. So now it's just like consuming kava that was placed on the side of a highway, essentially. So that's what happened to me. And even though the first cup of kava was good, I'm sure the kava was fine. But then during the processing, it got messed up. So now I know and I can smell it a million miles away before I even consume it. I can see it in the liquid, and I can definitely smell it and know what it looks like in the powder now. But that's because I've done some education and research, and now I'm going to be able to start taking photos to be able to explain that research more deeply in my blog and all those things. But point of the story is like there's still so much for all of us to learn in this industry, um, and to be honest with you, even people in the coffee industry, because coffee is very similar. You're pulling, plants from different countries all over the world that have different manufacturing processes and like regulations. And when you're going from countries that have lower regulations than the United States, it makes it to where like, yeah, you just want to be honest and really tell people about what the differences are in these products and how you know how to spot what's good and bad because otherwise are you really helping your people? Are you really like being a good positive community like leader if you're like, "Oh yeah, we want to keep you safe, all these things, but no, we're not going to tell you anything about our products." Like it's just not in the spirit of kava.
It's so interesting in this industry too, because I feel like it's so cool to me how like the Kavatenders are just as important of players in this industry as the owners of the products as
Oh
well.
yeah.
So I think that like it trickles down, like, and it's a great example of almost like any business, but like specifically within the kava industry, it really is because the kava tender is the one who's selling the product, of course, but they do have to describe it, who has to hear it from the product owner, from the company. And I think it all trickles down, and it's super important to be able to hold up each other accountable and know what's in the products that you're selling. And for the company who own these products need to be able to represent what's in their product and clearly label things. Definitely think that's a huge thing for the industry for sure.
So huge. So huge. And that's going to lead us into our next topic here. So, when Eddie and I worked together, we worked together in Phoenix, Arizona. And since then, both of us have gone in, different geographical directions. And Eddie ended up in Chicago. Chicago doesn't have any kava bars, but it does have a lot of Delta 8 stores, and kratom is definitely big there as well. So I'd love to hear from you, Eddie. What's it like on the ground in Chicago being a kava person, but not having a place? And also, what's it even like at these Delta 8 places? What's going on there?
Definitely. Yeah, so I grew up in Chicago and I had heard about kava here and there. We actually did have a kava bar in Chicago at one point. And I believe it had closed down in, I want to say like 2018, 2019. And it was a weird concept because actually at this kava bar, it was BYOB, meaning bring your own beer. It was actually, they served kava, but then you could also bring your own alcohol, which is completely,
Oh no.
yeah, if you guys don't know, not right. You should not do that ever. Kava and alcohol are not supposed to be consumed together. They both process through your liver. And I definitely feel like that was a terrible start for the industry in Chicago, and kind of set the tone for everything. That business didn't last long, as you could imagine. I don't think people enjoyed it that much. And I also think that it didn't really bring the culture that kava bars should bring. And as that closed down, all of the Delta 8 products and hemp derivatives started to pop up. And that started to become a little bit more of a, become popular within the city. So now what you'll see if you come to Chicago, oftentimes you'll see a bunch of quote unquote dispensaries, which they aren't actual dispensaries because they're only selling hemp derivatives, but they're oftentimes sold as regular THC products, which is so crazy to me because it's obviously not. Delta products do go through a different process and they're synthetic. So it's not the real plant that you're getting. In my opinion, I'm not too crazy about them. They definitely caused me to have like a little bit more anxiety and just I haven't had the best experiences with it. But it's crazy to see such a big and beautiful city with so much culture, lack alcohol-free spaces. And I feel like a kava bar would be absolutely perfect in the city. It's definitely needed for sure.
Man, that's such an interesting point because, like you mentioned, kava and alcohol does not go together. So you have a bad player who comes in and just ruins such a good thing for so many people. And, a side note, anytime I hear stories like that, I always just like add to my to-do list. I'm like, all right, well, that state's up next because I'm always trying to get to know the players in the industry so that we can talk to lawmakers to make sure that we do what we can to protect kava, protect kratom from the bad players. But comparing this to the deltas is such a fascinating conversation because there's a lot of beverage companies out there that when they're making like botanical drinks, like canned beverages of different kinds, it's becoming more increasingly popular to have the deltas. Now, at first, I remember when the CBD drinks started coming on the market. CBD is amazing, but it's incredibly difficult. It makes you a fringe business. The moment you sell CBD, it flags you. So a lot of different credit card processors won't pick you up. So, like, let's say you wanted to have your POS system on Square. Well, if you have Delta 8, I mean, excuse me, if you have CBD on there, because it's technically from cannabis, like from not the same place as Delta, right? We're talking about two completely different plants here. Even though technically cannabis is a large category. That was a pun. Even though it's this big category, like Delta 8, Delta 9 is a hemp derivative, like Eddie's saying. It is not the same thing as the THC and the CBDs that you buy at dispensaries or other like CBD stores. Those come from completely different plants. They're not synthetically created in labs. So when we look at kava and kratom are straight up botanicals. They are like you don't have to add anything to them. All you have to do is make sure that you farmed it appropriately, processed it appropriately. And by process, I just mean transporting it, drying the leaves, turning it into powder if that's the way that you're going to consume it, and making sure that there's no mold or no heavy metals within that whole process. But that's it. That's just the same as like a green tea leaf. Like if you want a cup of jasmine green tea, it's the same exact concept. But yet, kava and kratom are demonized by the media, whereas the deltas are not. And I think that this is a huge topic I want to talk about with you, Eddie, because, you know, some brands they're doing it and it's all right and it's the experience for some people, they really enjoy it. And for others, people, especially who are a little bit more sensitive, they feel that anxiety. They feel the, the fact that it's only one part of the plant, like it doesn't have all the other botanical constituents to it. Um, so that being said, Eddie, have you, encountered people who are into the deltas, but they don't like kava or kratom? Or, have you encountered anybody who has a weird perception, of any of these botanicals?
Definitely, yeah. So I have definitely seen a lot of negative opinions about kava and kratom, and I feel like Delta 8 is kind of thought of as I've heard it be referred to as like diet weed, which is so crazy to me because
Diet
it's
weed.
yeah. And like it is absolutely the opposite to me. It causes me to have like panic attacks and super like just a tense negative feeling for me. But yeah, I constantly hear negative things about kava and kratom. Right now on TikTok, actually, a huge trend is the new brew seltzers, but a huge influencer actually referenced had made a video on TikTok referencing the new brews as gas station crack. She was sold it at a gas station, which I wasn't aware that new brews were actually being sold at gas stations, which
It's
is kind of crazy.
terrible.
I know, yeah. And so they had made a video about how they had really enjoyed this seltzer and they were drinking it every day. And then they had researched what was actually in the seltzer and they came across a bunch of negative information about kratom. And in the video, she was kind of expressing that she was upset because she didn't want to be taking a synthetic opiate, which is just not, it's not synthetic because it's a plant.
No.
Yeah, actual pharmaceuticals are synthetic because that's a chemical makeup while this is naturally occurring. Um, but yeah, it's just super frustrating to see that because as someone who's obviously been in the industry for a while now, I take it personally just because I've seen so many people be helped from drinking kava and kratom and to see people have such negative thoughts about it and not only spread misinformation but judge others for consuming. I think that's extremely um, just a negative outlook on it. And for a plant that's been consumed for thousands of years by different cultures, I just can't believe it. And if you look at a lot of the comments, there's not many people really who are educated on the topic. So I think it's really important to be able to find the education and find ways to connect with others to be able to get the word out and kind of get a better understanding of this so that people can properly consume these products if they choose to. And if they don't, that's fine too. But I just think that the misjudgment and misinformation being shared is extremely frustrating.
It
Uh,
is.
yeah, and also like we were saying, I think that there are places for kava and kratom, and I don't think gas stations or smoke shops are one of them. I think that, like we were saying, with the expectations of Kavatenders, it I don't think a gas station worker should have to be educated on these products either, though. So I mean, it kind of goes hand in hand in the sense where there's a time and place for these products, and a 7-Eleven is not one of them.
It's definitely not. Yeah, context is so key, and that's important for all the things that we're saying. And, even circling back to the deltas for a second here, because there are, Delta 8, Delta 9, both of them are becoming more popular on the market. And I understand that, I personally am not like I don't consume them all the time. I think I've consumed like, if there's a can to sample around or something like that, or if I'm creating a recipe guide out of a Delta 8 or a Delta 9 product, I don't mind doing it, especially because I do know that there are some people out there who legitimately are helped by that. It's not great with my brain chemistry or my husband's. Eddie, you mentioned that you don't, it doesn't vibe
Right.
with you either. I'm sure there's someone out there who, really enjoys them and it works for them, and that's good on you. We're not sitting here to say or vilify the deltas, but what we are saying is that there is a context for everything and the education needs to be there. And if people are going to be open-minded to this synthetic delta, which is literally just a byproduct from hemp, then you need to just understand and recognize that like kava and kratom are like you don't need to go through that process. Like you can just enjoy
Right.
that. And like so if you have a negative view of kava and kratom, but you do not have a negative view of the deltas, just maybe have an open-minded moment. That's all we're trying to say here because there's something for everyone out there on the market. And I would so much rather anybody who is struggling from any sort of addiction, I would so much rather you drink a Delta 8 or a Delta 9 canned beverage than go down a terrible path. I'd rather you have a new brew, not in the context of a gas station or a smoke shop. I'd rather you have one, enjoy one at a kava bar than go out there and, you know, consume alcohol or some other drug of choice. So it's all about just being aware of what these botanicals truly are. And even if something seems sensationalized in the media, let's start asking some questions. So, for example, there's a lot of bad press out there about kratom. We'll start there and then we'll close this out talking about kava. But with kratom, there's over sensationalized stories of people who consume too much kratom that, like, literally no one, like, everyone at a kava bar would be like, "Are you crazy? We're not going to serve you that much." There's always that one person out there who overdoes it, and then states go to try to figuring out how to make it more regulated or illegal. Um, this is a huge problem because most of the time people are very uninformed, especially the part where kratom tickles the same receptors as opiates. It's not that it's heroin, you guys. It's not that it's something that is even like you can't even relate it because it's different. It's entirely different. But understanding the neurochemical process to that is going to be essential for you seeing that because otherwise it's going to say, oh yeah, it hits the opioid receptors. Like, if you don't know what that means, that might scare you. So you gotta just put a little bit of effort into learning yourself. So Eddie, I'd love to hear a story about, did you ever think like before you ever tried kratom, were you like, what the hell was that? Like, were you nervous
Yeah.
of it, or like, did you have to do research before wanting to consume it?
Definitely, yeah. So I kind of had a different perspective of it, kind of similar to like what I was talking about. In Chicago, there aren't any kava bars, so there's often like kratom stores. So growing up, I kind of always thought that kratom was, I don't know what I thought it was. I kind of thought it was similar to like salvia or something. So yeah, and I was kind of always like weary of it for sure. I wanted to definitely stay away from it a little bit. But after working in the kava industry and kind of seeing like the proper way of brewing it, and the proper way of consuming it, it totally makes sense to why people have those false ideas of it. Because with if you're not brewing or if you're not straining the sediment out of kratom, I don't think a lot of people are aware of that. You are consuming the whole plant, which you aren't supposed to do. It's part of the coffee family. So a lot of times people don't understand that. So you wouldn't eat coffee grounds, right? So I'm like that's kind of like the comparison of it. Of course, you're gonna have an upset stomach when you're not straining your product. And I think that my initial idea of kratom was way off, of course, but that's why I don't even blame people for having negative ideas of kratom. I just think that that education for me really let me experience it in a great way, honestly, and use it with intention, and being able to properly drink it, I think is the most vital part, I think, for me.
Yeah. And it's important to note there's like 400,000 different plants out there on planet Earth, like probably more than that, but that was the last Google search I did. And if let's pretend that we all vilified kava or kratom and then the worst case scenario happens where that gets pulled off the market, right? There's always going to be something else. Well, I don't want to say that exactly because there's nothing exactly like kava out there, but like what I'm saying is there's always a pattern if you just look at the past 100 years of what has been legal or not legal, especially in the United States, when it comes to different botanicals. And sometimes we get it right, and sometimes we get it wrong in terms of what things are genuinely good for us, just in certain cases, and then what things are just like, yeah, matter of public safety. No one should be consuming lead. Like, don't put lead paint on your walls. We can all agree on that, but obviously look at what happened with cannabis over the past 100 years. So the whole point of this is there's always going to be something. So just to, if you've ever had a bad experience or you are talking to a customer who's had a bad experience, yeah, I've had a bad experience with the stop sign because I slammed my face into one when I was like in fourth grade. That doesn't mean I don't stop at stop signs. Like you can still you can have a bad experience with something, but then still be able to come back and trust it later. So, one final note I know we wanted to close out on here was talking about, well, not one final, I have two final notes really, but talking about kava real quick. I was even on a phone call with someone else in the industry who works on formulations, and they had cited an old kava study, the old kava store study that said that kava leads to liver damage. I know I've mentioned this before. I'll mention it a million times until I turn blue. That study was done in a completely unscientific and non-controlled way, and this has already been proven. But of course, that this disproven link um, has not been properly marketed. So what was happening in that original study that got totally effed up is they were consuming the kava, not just the roots, but they were also consuming the stems and the leaves. The leaves are toxic. We are not supposed to be consuming that part of the plant. Additionally, the people in the study were all drinking alcohol. So they were not told that they cannot take kava alongside of alcohol. They also were not asked to stop drinking alcohol over the course of the study. That was over the course of months. Like this wasn't just like a week long experience or anything. And when all of the study participants at the very end were tested for their liver function, yeah, a lot of their liver function went downhill because they were consuming the very bad toxic part of the plant and they were continuing to drink alcohol. But when you take those two factors out and you look at the only participants who were not consuming any alcohol, there was way less damage, but there was still some damage due to the fact of the consumption of the leaves. So when we look at studies of kava, of people who've consumed kava over generations, you look at Fijians, you look at Tongans, you look at Samoans, none of them are getting liver cancer or anything like that at all from kava. At all. If it's processed properly, you're not getting that weird diesel garbage, you're not getting the wrong part of the plant, you're going to be good. But the thing is, when I was on the phone with that formulation expert, it's not that they weren't citing science, they were just citing bad science and they hadn't done research since then, or maybe the disproven part didn't come up on their dashboard yet. And therefore they were making decisions like in this industry as a very important player in this industry, they were making inaccurate decisions. And you'd think, oh, well, this is an expert because they're in formulations. Like when I was in that meeting, I was kind of shocked for a second because I was like, am I like it almost made me think like, am I stupid? Like, did I read that wrong? Like I was gaslighting myself because of how that information wasn't I'm like, really? Like, I thought that was known by now. Like, am I the only person who saw that? But I know that that's not the case because when I talk to other people in the kava industry, they know about that update as well. So it's just really important you know, if you think you know something about an herb, uh, look more and look at the context and also look at who's funding those studies because in the early 90s, a lot of pharmaceutical companies put a lot of money into kava studies, like a lot of money. And they found a lot of positive things, including a lot, like they've proven the anxiety component of kava lactones. Like they've proven it. It's there. So how is it that, 2 decades later, there's this study that tries to vilify kava just as kava bars are on the rise? Hmm. Who's doing that? Oh, who is funding that research? Oh, a pharmaceutical company that's not interested in letting this product go to market because in that same quarter, they were trying to launch a new anti-anxiety medication. Hmm. Hmm. Okay, well then I'm going to stop looking at that source and I'm going to go take a look at people who've actually been consuming this for generations. I'm going to look at the Tongans, I'm going to look at the Fijians, I'm going to look at the Hawaiians and see what really is the case for these botanicals. So important. So important. So I'm going to get off my little rant pedestal there for a second and I want to close this out by asking you, Eddie, all of this being said, obviously we are very fired up about the way people misunderstand these botanicals. So what are you working on and what would you like to plug in efforts of helping educate the public and giving them resources that they need?
Definitely, yeah. So right now I'm working on a project that is going to hopefully manifest into something physical. But I really want to make an effort to kind of connect with the general public about different botanicals and being able to educate everyone on the different uses, the history, the options, and different products that you could possibly incorporate into your life. And it might be helpful and it might not be, but at least you are aware of um, your options and being able to make choices for yourself. And I think that's super important. So I definitely want everyone to stay tuned with that. And I'm excited to be making an announcement soon.
Yes, best believe we're going to have more conversations with Eddie. He'll be coming back. So if you guys enjoyed this episode, have any questions for Eddie, or you just have a thought or a story you'd like to share that you thought of because of our conversation, please send me an email, hello@marinamars.com, and we will make sure that we get to your question and help you figure out, what is it? What is it about kava and kratom? Exactly. So thank you so much, Eddie, for being here. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was great.
Yay! Of course, of course. Well, thank you all so much for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. As always, if you need anything, just let me know.